for the sake of the YouTube vid.
Oh yeah, we're here. All right. So we fixed the technical difficulties, guys. Again, welcome to episode 4 of the Road to Arc. Today we've got Ben, the TO, and we've got BFG Marvin. And before we had those massive technical difficulties and you couldn't hear what I was saying, we were asking Ben about his life, and he basically told us his life story. So now he's going to have to repeat himself. If you do have any questions, guys, in chat, genuine questions, please feel free to ask. We will ask Ben on your behalf. But Ben, before we were completely muted, how did you discover the hobby? How did you get into it, and what age?
Yeah. Well, so I was in my first year of secondary school, and I went to school about an hour from where I lived, so we had a lot of time on the bus, a lot of time. And there was a guy on the bus named Tom, and I don't remember how it came up in conversation or whatever, but he was already in the hobby. His older brother played. I think they played fantasy actually most of the time, and I thought this was really cool. And there was a store in the shop. A store in the town, like 1 hour from where I live, where I was going to school. And I stopped by there one afternoon when I could and took the big chonky catalog home. Like they had a book of every single miniature, and I flicked through and I found the ones that I thought were the coolest ones. And I think my very first ever miniatures were Corn Berserkers. Because when you're of course, like the blood ones must be the best, right, at fighting. I think I like butterfly fluttered from like army to army for about 3 or 4 years of just buying like 2 boxes of one thing and then getting excited by maybe what the new release was. And but yeah, a store opened in my hometown, so I didn't have to travel that far anymore. And I think I rode my bike to that store once, if not twice, every weekend from like year 8 through year 11. And I only stopped because I got my driver's license and stopped riding my bike there and started driving there instead.
Yeah.
And that's in fact how I ended up getting into like tournaments. Was the guy who ran that?
You didn't have a break at all. You just kept hobbying, because most people
No.
Most people we chat to are like, I discovered sport or girls or, you know.
You're funny, girls. No breaks for me.
And were you playing during that time or just painting?
Look, column A and column B, like as I said, the shop opening in my town meant that you could actually go to a games night and like play and meet new people and play that way. I don't know if you guys knew a bloke named Craig Clark. He went around as Mouse Muffins for a long time online. He actually ran the store in my town, Bairnsdale, and so I got probably one of the best painting educations that you could ask for. I'm hanging around him, mostly just fueled by like envy and wishing you could have a drop of his talent. But yeah, he started going to tournaments again more regularly when I almost like the end of my high schooling, and there was a tournament coming up, and he said, look, there's some spots left at this Arc tournament. Do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't really have like a whole army done because I'm still flitting and non-committal. And he said, look, I'll lend you something. You've just got to paint like, an extra 200 points of orcs or something in the 3 months we've got, and come along, you'll really enjoy it. And I mean, again, silly like me, didn't realize that like 200 points of orcs was still quite a number of miniatures to get through.
It's still a lot of boys.
Yeah. We pulled a couple of all-nighters. That was great. And I got to Arc, and I think coming from a small country town so this hobby's pretty niche. Like I'm totally aware of that it's, you're using a pretty small chunk of the pie when it comes to people that are interested in this hobby. But in little country towns, that pie is really small to begin with. And so there was 4 or 5 of us. And to come to a tournament with 150 people, almost all of which were like more enthusiastic about it than anyone I'd met before. It was like, I've described it before as like finding your people.
Yeah.
You know, so. Yeah, I remember walking around on some guy was running Blood Axe Orcs, and he had, Boss Grimjaw wants you posters, and he put them on every single table, right? He like wandered around and left flyers for every player to join his war. And there was like another guy carrying around an actual banner with actual skulls hanging off it as a prop. And I just thought, coming from this tiny little place where we were just stoked, to get like tufts on our bases, like that was the coolest thing we ever did, to this environment was just a huge culture shock in the best possible way.
Sounds awesome. Do you remember what year that was? Like how long ago that arc was?
Okay, 2007, because I'm pretty sure it's 2007 because I graduated in 2006, and it was like there was a January after that. I don't remember what number arc it was, but yeah, long time ago.
17 years ago?
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I can still remember some of the games that I played that weekend.
Yeah.
Like I remember playing Jason Guthrie's Dark Eldar, and like you know what I mean? Like this is so long ago. I don't remember what I had for breakfast like 2 days ago, but those memories from that first weekend are just like seared and branded into my brain.
And that was your first ever experience was an arc for a tournament.
Yeah, it was. So again, it wasn't something you could just go to where I lived, right? And so, and I didn't even know they really existed as a thing. We played games and there was winners and losers when you played at the store, but the idea of like a thing where people would travel to go to and it would be like an event, was just totally foreign to me. So, yeah, and as I say, it was just this magnificent weekend. I was immediately enamored with the community as a whole, and I've been to a lot of events in the time since, but I think you never forget your first, right?
Yeah. So I got you hooked then.
Well,
yeah.
Little segue. You were my first. So my first experience at a Warhammer tournament was your first ever Grand Alliance.
Yeah, the first and only, I think.
No, you did a second one. You did two.
Did we?
Yeah, I went to the second
all
one.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
So the first one both times I went with my friend Ash, and we actually came first in the first Grand Alliance. And then in the second one we were defending our crown, and we finished dead last. We finished dead last, but I tell you what, and people have seen me roll dice. I blame it on Ash's dice rolls. They were horrid. He cost us every game.
Somehow worse than yours.
Have you?
No, man.
Have you?
I just love the idea of not just blaming your own dice, but it's my friend's dice.
Oh man,
it's even a step further removed from my skill level.
They were shocking, dude. I rolled average, which for me is phenomenal. Have you organised any other tournaments other than the Grand Alliances, or are you?
Yeah. So, in between, going to Arc for the first time and now being the TO, like in the kind of in that middle section there, we kind of got a gaggle of us that would travel to Melbourne from Bairnsdale for things, for events. And after a while, we sort of sat around and went, you know what? We travel like 4 times a year. The least those schmucks in Melbourne can do is travel once, right? So me and a friend of mine, Les, ran a tournament in Bairnsdale for a number of years named Bladestorm. It didn't ever quite get to the arc proportions, but we had some really fun times. People would come down, they'd book accommodation. It's right in the middle of town, across from the car park from Macca's, and it was just like really, it was just a really chill, fun time. I think I tried to borrow what I felt were like the best bits of other events that I've been to, or other like tournament packs and things. And then after a number of times doing that, like I had moved to Melbourne in the interim for uni, and And then I got married up here, and so it started to not make a lot of sense for me to run a tournament in bed. Like, I'm traveling as the organizer to try to convince people to travel. So we did run Bladestorm one final time in Melbourne in the middle of COVID. Like, oh man, we like put a deposit down on a venue, which then had to cancel because they weren't allowed to have anyone there, but we couldn't get the deposit back because they owed it to, however many other people that didn't have the money to pay for it. We moved to another venue in Ringwood. We got like 2 weeks before the event. Dan Andrews said we were allowed to go outside again. So like, it's on, guys, it's on. Yeah. And then it was touch and go. It was so touch and go. And then I think like 2 weeks after the event, we went back into lockdown. Like, we just kind of just got in there. Oh, it was so lucky. And also, like, I feel like just the thing, like, I had a few friends come and they said it was exactly what you needed in that period. Like, just some normal, fun thing. And then since then, because I've been back involved in Arc, it just kind of has subsumed most of my event organizing energies. And I'm not averse to, like, having a go at something else in the future, but I might have to wait for my kids to grow up a bit before I have time.
Yeah, commitment, massive commitment.
Mm.
So what sort of pushed you into doing some TOing? Because like for people that don't know Ben's you've been pretty big in the competitive scene. Like, I think you were highly placed in Age of Sigma in the world, I think it was at one stage, or was it Australia? I think it was world, wasn't it? We can brag. We're here to brag.
Hey, you know what? You probably know better than I do.
I heard third in the world, I think.
Well, was it okay, so I came third at CanCon the very first year that it ran. And maybe that was the first tournament after Age of Sigma had points. And so for that 1 month before anyone else ran anything, maybe I was third in the world. Who would know?
It doesn't matter. I was number one in Warhammer Combat cards at one stage, and it may have only just launched, but that's my claim to fame.
Yeah.
So competitive gaming you've been into for a bit.
In the strictest sense, I guess yes, but this is really interesting. So because my first experience was Arc and events like that, back in those days, Australia largely, but Victoria specifically, had a really unique way of doing tournaments, which included a composition score. So the idea behind the composition score, right, is that if we're being honest, Games Workshop tries to make a balanced game, and it's an impossible task. Like, I'm not saying they're not putting it, but it's impossible. The best can't do it. And so let's say, for the sake of argument, that Space Marines are just a really good codex this edition, and Tyranids are not a very good codex this edition. The last thing we want is people who have poured, hours and hours of painting and money and all that sort of stuff into their Tyranids, knowing I'm going to bring it in and I can't win. I say knowing, right? And so composition scores were meant to be kind of like a handicap system where, yes, taking the best units in the best book would get you more battle points, but in theory, it's balanced out in some way by the composition points that less optimized lists have. So the reason I mention this, apart from the fact that Arc is like the only tournament that I know that still uses comp scores, is that I was always really big into that idea of not everybody has the time or the money to meta chase. And I don't want to exclude people from that kind of adrenaline rush of maybe I can win it. I can win this, right? So yeah, I played almost exclusively events that had comp scores for the longest time. So there were a lot of events that were coming in the kind of transition period where some events were running comp and some weren't, where I just didn't go to events that didn't run comp scores. And I didn't want to, can I swear on this channel?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't want to shit on anyone's pancakes, right? So I'm not going to go into their Facebook groups or their forum threads and say, you're doing it wrong. I just want to go, right?
I've never actually thought of the comp score balancing out the meta chasing. I've never even considered that as one of the reasons behind comp scoring, which is actually it's actually really good because I currently live with someone who is in the competitive scene, and the amount of kits that man builds is phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it. It is nuts. It is nuts. And there's no way that I could ever like I'd say methodic. I'm a methodic painter, and it takes me a long time to paint a list. And I plan a list out, and regardless of what happens in a book, I try and stick to that list and just paint all of those units.
The end.
And that's where comp score helps immensely.
Yeah, and look, that was always the theory, and I think comp became a victim of a couple things, and the first one was that nobody could decide the perfect way to do it, which was ironic because it was only introduced because we understood that no one could make a balanced game. So you're asking, could we have a perfect answer when the problem is perfection is impossible?
Yeah.
But also, I think the other thing that that has pushed comp out of the scene at the moment is the internet, and the fact that it's very easy now to access reams and reams of data of what lists are winning events and what units are in all those lists, and so it's maybe there's a little bit more of, well, if John wants to start a new army of Space Marines, he can very easily go and find out if he wants to win games what he should buy. Where that was a bit more of a crapshoot in the kind of pre-internet.
The older rule sets probably made it easier for a comp scoring too, as opposed to the new one with all these characters with different buffs and auras and strats and stuff. I think the game, as much as people say, like I've heard many complaints about the new edition, like it's soulless and stuff like that. It's a bit more balanced than previous editions. Not that I play a tremendous amount, but used to have the formations and stuff like that. And like you were saying, if there was a codex that wasn't overly strong, they sort of just sat there and they weren't overly strong. They didn't get FAQs. Your codex was what it was, so you had to sort of just deal with it or start another army. So yeah, I think the new editions make it a bit harder to do a comp score, if anything.
Yeah, and so ultimately, I think that's kind of why. And if I'll do a segue now, why Arc's landed on the comp system that it has, right? So it's been through I've seen a number of different systems, right? So you have maybe a panel of what you might call expert judges who sits down and look at every list and assign scores. That's really cool if you can find people who will do it, that have the right and aren't playing in the event that you're running, right? And increasingly, people just go to lots of things, and so trying to find someone is often really hard. We used to do, there was a while back, there was this idea, this system called Community Comp, which they had kind of a panel that had this, it's almost like an alternate point system, right? So you had like 20 comp points to spend, and a unit of Death Company was 2 comp points. But if you had 2 units of Death Company, it was 5 because it's better. 2 of them are more than twice as good as one of them, and that was really good for a while. There've also been other little systems like math-based systems. Did you spend at least 30% of your points on the troops choices and things like that? And look, where we've landed at Arc is that ultimately, like, firstly, finding those judges is really hard. But the idea is that we kind of want the event to cater to what the community wants it to be, right? And in that sense, the comp at Arc is marked by your opponents, where they'll give you a mark, some sort of score on a scale. We'll top and tail it because we're aware that there is a concern that, oh, well, I actually just smashed you 7 ways from Sunday, so you'll give me the minimum score out of spite. Yeah. I'm not saying it happens, but I'm saying there is that niggling little voice in the back of people's heads that say, but what if it does? So we top and tail it. And the idea is that means that if the community is happy for the power level to increase a bit, and they are happy to give reasonable scores to armies that are a bit stronger, well, that's cool. That's their prerogative. If the community as a whole wants lists to be a bit softer and therefore will mark a bit harder, well, that's their prerogative, right? So we're not telling anybody what sort of army to bring, but because your opponents will be marking it, the idea is that the comp score is also doing a lot of work before the event. So when you're sitting down with your book flicking through, right, arguably the bit where it adds points to your score at the end and we read out all the names in the order is great, but the most important work it can do is in the lead up when people are going, you know what, I think I might leave Bellacore at home. Yeah, I might actually, you know what? I've always wanted to run Scarbrand. I haven't run Scarbrand before. Yeah, we'll try. So the bit where people are deciding lists, that's where comp, I think, needs to have the most work, because if, for the sake of argument, someone brings something just heinous, telling their opponents, oh, but don't worry, they won't finish very high, doesn't necessarily put much ointment on that burn,
Yeah.
So we wanted to do a lot of work beforehand.
It's sort of combos with your sports as well, because someone that does get dunked on by a list that's pretty strong isn't going to have a fun time. It's probably not going to sports score you very well.
Yeah, and so that's not explicit anywhere, right? Like, we don't write down in the pack, hey, mark your opponent down on sports as well.
Yeah.
But I think you're living in a fantasy land if you think that people will silo those things totally. And again, that's maybe a feature, not a bug, right? Like, that's anything we can do to encourage people to have the most fun, between the two of you as possible every game is what we want.
Yeah, and they probably wouldn't do the sports score quite as harshly. Like, if the opponent's, like demeanor and how they play the game is still going to affect the sports score a lot compared to just how the army performs as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I know I've heard, not all the time, but I've certainly heard the idea that, well, my opponent's army is very non-interactive. We didn't actually do a lot together. He just sort of rang rings around me and shot me, and I took models off. I've heard somebody make the case that perhaps a more interactive, we're both doing things, we're both getting to like get our stuff in, is a more sporting way to play the game. Right now, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, but I just know I've heard it. Right. So again, we're dealing in reality, not in ideal.
Yeah. So with that being said, for someone that is going to their first arc and they are wanting to build a list, it's an interesting one, isn't it? How, if someone was going to their first arc, what advice would you give them when it does come to building their list? Let's say they're building, I don't know, we'll use World Eaters because that's how you started. You started with Berserkers, and let's just say they want to run Angron and I don't know what's going really good right now. Angron and a bunch of Terminators, maybe. The Terminators strong. I think Terminators are strong, aren't they? A heap of them.
Look, it could be. I don't play World Eaters, so I don't know. All those heretics look the same to me.
Well, what do you play currently? How about that?
Oh man, no, that's not helpful at all because I have like so many armies. No. So look,
that's going to be a question later. We're going to go through all of your armies.
Yeah, no. Look, let's do our World Eaters example. So sure. Look, if this player's never been to any event before and Arc's their first event, then ultimately I probably just say maybe like scrunch up the player pack and put it in the bin and just build what you want, right? Because I think if you have never been to any sort of event before, let alone an Arc, then I think there's so many idiosyncrasies to the way that the event works that I don't think you want to start like playing the game straight away, right? In the like Survivor TV sense of like playing the game.
Yeah.
So ultimately, just I would say take what you are going to have the most fun playing with. But as you will probably learn, as that player will learn turning up to the event and hopefully looking at around other armies and the other players they play and the players their mates play. I think one of my favorite things about Arc armies are the ones that are like really intensely themed. the idea that okay, well, Angron and all of his Terminators is the best choice. But you know what I really think is really cool? The way that like the World Eaters do their gladiatorial pit fights. So really what I really want is a lot of berserkers with the the armorless arms and the all their weapons chained to their wrists so they don't drop them in the arena, and so kind of embracing that theme aspect a bit more and sometimes at the cost of the raw brute force of the army, right? But you're going to both have and give games that are really unique and really interesting and really memorable with that sort of thing. But yeah, I think overall the armies that win Arc they're not 200 grots can't fight their way out of a paper bag, right? But they're also not the cutting edge of what's meta. I think you want to try to strike a nice balance between what you want to play, what you want to paint, because there is a lot of hobby element to the way that Arc runs. So, something that you can, make really pretty. And I think a theme and a story really helps with the kind of army that we like to see, and I think the other players like to see too.
Yeah, so going for the thematic aspect more than anything else for your first time.
Yeah. Well, as I say, if you're new to tournaments, please just bring what you like because you're going to have a good time. We want you to have a good time first of all. But if what you want is to do really well at Arc, then I think you really want to, as I say, try and try and get a theme going. Pour that passion that you have for your story or your dudes or your character into the way that you do modeling and painting, and just and play the mission. Please play the mission, because no mission at Arc that I've ever been involved in has ever read you get the most points when all your opponent's dudes are dead.
Yeah.
So
go on to the days of tabling.
Yeah.
Look,
that's very
fingers
old,
and toes
very old
crossed.
school.
Yeah.
So on that, you make there's custom scenarios, custom missions for Arc.
There are.
Are you one of the creators of said missions?
Yeah. So that tradition has been long, like the very first Arc I went to all had funky missions. And we've done a few different things. They've done a few different spins on it in the past. I remember going to an Arc where every mission was themed after a different Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Oh no, it was great. It was so great. Then there were some that were themed around. There was like a metal band, I think, that the TOs liked, that they picked songs, and those are the names of the missions. They try to write missions that were relevant to that. We've had there's some classics that have appeared again and again and again over time. There's one called Thunderhawk Down, which was the idea that there are actually no objectives on the board at the start of the game, but a Thunderhawk crashes and drops debris in different places along a line, but you're not exactly sure where it's going to land when you start, so you've got to be flexible enough to take advantage of wherever that lands. That was always a classic. As the way that Games Workshop has done their missions has changed, ours have changed a little bit as well. So now if you and I were going to play a game of Pariah Nexus now, isn't it?
Yep.
We would deal out 3 cards, a deploy card and a how you get primary card and a twist card. Last year, and it won't surprise anyone if it happens again, that's the kind of format that we did. We basically had 3, they weren't physical cards, they were 3 cards on a screen and printed out on a piece of paper, but it would follow the similar format. One of them told you how to deploy, one of them told you how to get your primary points, and one of them was an interesting twist. Because I think that you don't want to depart too far from the way that you normally play 40k. Otherwise, people go, well, actually, I'm here to play Warhammer. What is this? Why are we getting the skipping ropes out? I'm here to play Warhammer. But also, there are some people that I know only play 6 games of Warhammer 40,000 every year, and they play all 6 of those games at Arc. And so if you so you know, you have to keep an anchor back in the kind of vanilla game so that people know what they're doing. You make it too funky and nobody finishes. You get to turn 3 and everyone's still reading through the novella of special rules that you wrote them. And it was really a fun 3 turns, but nobody finished because it was too complicated and there was too much extra thinking. So, yeah, I think, you know, sneak preview. That's the kind of format I would expect again this year coming around. That it'll be a twist on the kind of missions that you'd see in the Pariah Nexus pack.
Right. So for people that want to practice, that's you just play some Pariah Nexus at 1350.
Yeah, or you know, if you feel that way inclined, hit us up at the Arc 40K Facebook chat, and we can actually send you last year's missions, right? Which are likewise just a twist on the tournament pack that was around at that point. So you can get an idea of how twisty the twists get.
Yeah. So Nathan, we've had a question. Nathan has asked, do you play test your custom scenarios to see how they play out? Or I imagine you guys would be well versed enough in a game to know whether.
Look, okay. So the short answer is yes. We test them out. Sometimes some of that testing is, I guess, what you might call like theoretical, in the sense that I go, well, you know, I might go to a couple other people within the group and go, well, look, I don't play Death Guard, right? Is there anything in this mission that's going to like interact really weirdly with them, right? So there's a kind of feeling out process, but we definitely try them out and test them out, if only so that, like, you know, like I write a rule and I think it's clear as crystal, and then I pass it to another human and they go, what? So you know, like you have to rewrite it in a way that's a bit clearer, or add a little note that says, by the way, you can't do this if you do that. Try to preempt some of those things, because the last thing you want, last thing I want on the Arc weekend when there's 400,000 things happening is having to answer the same question 75 times because I wrote it confusingly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we absolutely test in a couple of different ways. That's not to say that we get it, like, you know, we foresee every possible doom. But the other great thing that I found about Arc is that most people who come are coming in, I guess, what you call like the right spirit. And if someone comes up to me and says, Ben, do you put the objective here or there, or like, actually, do you count this model, and I can probably turn to most people and go, what do you reckon's reasonable? And they go, oh yeah, okay. And again, I empathize with people who are like, oh, but it has to be absolutely standardized, so we're all competing the same way in a fair kind of manner. But at the same time, like, every game is a social contract between two people. And if both players are happy to go, you know what, I actually think what Ben meant was do A, and then 4 tables over, two people go, you know, I actually think Ben, what he actually meant was do B. It doesn't really matter to me as long as each table's on a level playing field.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you'll sit down across the table from a friend at lunch and go, oh, I can't believe, you know, I didn't think to fall back and do that. And the guy goes, wait, you could fall back in that mission? You know, like, that's about as awkward as it ever gets. I haven't ever had anybody give me the feedback that that wasn't an appropriate solution, to just kind of like, well, can you work it out? Can you just like agree on what you think is the reasonable outcome and just go from there?
Yeah, sounds fair.
Speaking of awkward, this is a little question I wanted. What is one of the strangest sort of decisions you've had to make as a TO? Like, what's one of the weirdest things that's come up and you've had to organize with them? Yeah. Or is there a couple of them?
So look, there are always some kind of funny ones. I remember back at Bladestorm a couple of times we had to work out what on earth to do with the fact that someone had gotten so blind drunk on the Saturday night that they they absolutely couldn't grow it. Like they were in the emergency room or something at the Bairnsdale Hospital on the Sunday morning, but they could definitely try to make it back for the third game. That was kind of a bit of a funny one to try to work out. Oh, actually, my favorite thing. No, I've got one now. So, and I'm sure in retrospect he won't mind me mentioning him by name. He can. So, Matt Morrisoli, who is a he's a really, really good player. He came to Bladestorm one year, and at Bladestorm, the sports system at the time was basically like, here are a list of things that we consider good sportsmanship, and here are a list of things that we consider poor sportsmanship. And it was just, was your opponent a good sport? Right? Yes or no? There was no sliding scale. It was just, did you basically meet the standard of behavior or didn't you? And Matt finished his game, and his opponent said, oh, hey, you just fill out your own sports score. Like, you know, we had a fun time. It was fine, right? Like, you just fill it out. I can't be bothered walking over the side of the table. You just fill it out. And Matt filled it out, but he filled it out giving himself a poor sports score. A no, he did not meet the minimum standard of behavior. And he was the only one of the whole tournament. And I'm sitting there going, what on earth is going on with these guys? I walked past that table like 4 times. It seemed fine. And it turned out, and he came up to me like, I think I asked him about it. I was like, was it okay? And he realized his mistake, and he said, oh, you'll just change it back, right? I said, no, scores are scores, mate. Scores. And now, look, truth be told, if it had come to the end of the second day and that score was the difference between Matt winning and not winning, I think we both know what would have happened. But it wasn't. And so he copped the only 100% marks for sports at that point in Bladestorm's history. He was the only player to not get a top full sports marks. I think that was probably my funniest little like TO thing.
Going back to your own ARC experiences, what are some of your most memorable moments at ARC? Any of the ARCs you've been to, and have you had a favorite player or players?
Oh man. Okay. So, it would be remiss of me not to say that probably the highlight ever was the year that I won ARC, which, geez, I think it might have been like my 13th or 14th go at it.
Ben's 13th Black Crusade to ARC.
Something like that. Yeah. I finally got my Cadia. And that was an unreal weekend. And I had a friend of mine, Damien Stallard, who had won ARC some years previously, in my ear all weekend. You know, I won a game and I won a game and I won a game, and he sort of, Ben, you might be able to do this. And I went, no, don't do that. Please don't say that. He said, and then I think after like 5 games, he said, this is it. You're never going to come this close again. Like, you've one more game, you got to do it. And I had sweat pouring out of every place sweat could pour out of for that last. He put so much pressure on me, and the kind of release at the end was something else. Actually, the guy who came second that year had borrowed another one of my armies, and I thought, as I'm standing up there with him, I said, if he beats me, he wouldn't have even come if I hadn't lent this army. If he beats me, I have just like been the author of my own demise.
He beats you with your own army,
right? But there's been plenty of fantastic moments. As I say, Damien, this friend of mine winning, that's almost as good as when you do, is when you see a friend doing that well. And the ARC gives out these skull trophies, and the picture of him kissing his skull in front of the whole ceremony has like become almost like a meme now at ARCs. It's the winner picture that gets bandied around. I've met some lifelong friends through ARC and other events. Like a really good friend of mine, Brenton Shaw, I think I met at an ARC. Or if not, I met the person who then introduced me to him at an ARC. I think I've had a lot of really good games over the years and a lot of favorite players. But I will give a particular shout out to Mitch Ragg. So Mitch, I think, approaches the hobby from a really similar place that I do. We have a really compatible kind of approaches. And I've played him a few times over the journey. He used to call himself the War Master, and he had a list of like grudges, that he would, I really need to beat this person in a tournament. I really need to beat this tournament. He had this list. And I don't know how long I was on that list for, but he never managed to cross me off.
Damn. Is that a call out?
Yeah, call out.
Hey. Oh, look, as I say, I'll accept it. Well,
We're happy to host the game,
Yeah. No.
See
Well,
who's gonna-
yeah. Well, somebody hit Mitch up, and anytime, anywhere, as long as my kids have been looked after.
There you go.
So, Matt.
play it.
I think with all of our technical difficulties, that's probably a good time to wrap it up at where we're at now.
Yeah.
We don't know who's going to be on the next episode, and there's still a few more weeks to come. So we might be asking Ben to come back to have a bit more of a chat.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, the one thing I'll mention, if I can, before I get kicked off, is that if you are a person who is playing at Arc, or you want to play at Arc, or your friends playing at Arc, the most important thing I can say is please just go and read the player pack, what I spent a lot of time typing, because the last thing anybody wants is a gotcha on the weekend where you think something works one way and it doesn't. It's the best guide we can provide. Tells you how to score your points. It tells you what you can expect when you're marked by a paint judge, all that kind of nonsense. So as I say, please go and give that a read. There are still spots. So if you are and someone who hasn't played Arc before, but now you're Arc curious, come along. And if you don't play 40K, this year's Arc's really exciting because there's lots of other events on at the same time. So look, I'll say the thing that what is it, PT Barnum? There's something for everyone.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks so much for having me, guys.
That's all right. We have got one comment here. I don't know if it's a legit one or not. And I might just cut it out at the end of this video if it's not a legit one. Sauncey has said, one thing that stuck with me, Ben, was what you said during our game. I'm not here to cut your dick off.
Oh, yeah.
Keep that in mind ever since any Arc game. Is that legit?
Yeah, that actually came from Brenton, this friend of mine. So the idea is that, look, some things in games are like zero sum, right? Like, in order for me to win, you have to lose. But that's not always the case. There are plenty of times where that's not the case. And my thing is that, I'm here to have fun. I'm not here to cut your nuts off, right? So if you say to me, oh man, I think I can probably score a few more points with behind enemy lines if I can get that unit back, I'm just not sure if it'll survive. And I'm sitting there going, well, it's not affecting my objectives, and I'm not here to cut your nuts off, mate. You do you. Or if somebody forgets to do something, I was going to charge, but oh no, I moved on to the fireface. I go, well, just do it. I'm not here to cut your nuts off. So that's something that Brenton said to me once. And yeah, it is the kind of thing that sticks in your brain, but I think it's exactly the kind of attitude that we want to engender, right? That it's mate, just, take a breath, have a bit of fun. Everybody's here for the same reason, which is to try and get 200 plus people in the same room having as much enjoyment of this hobby that we all love as possible.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's a fantastic note to end it on.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time. And you too.
No wuckers.
We'll definitely catch up at Arc if we don't beforehand, and we'll say good day if you've got some time. TOing's
He'll be busy.
Oh, that's all right. No, look, I'm sure there'll be 3 or 4 seconds over the weekend that I can't be able to breathe.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you guys, and we'll see you on episode 5. Don't know who it is. Don't know. See you.
Bye.